Washington is the Honorable Adam Schiff, Democrat from Burbank and the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks for taking the time.
It's great to be with you. Thank you.
So based on the tweets we have seen and the fact that the president's surrogates have been attacking the Assistant Attorney General, can we assume that, or do you have the gut feeling that the president right now is setting up the possibility of trying to fire the special counsel through the Assistant Attorney General, and that if he doesn't do it, fire him?
Well, it certainly seems like he is trying to attack both the Deputy Attorney General as well as Bob Mueller. Last week, this very close confidant of the president started floating this idea that the president might fire Mueller. I think that drew a universally negative reaction from Democrats and Republicans. Some of the president's staunchest GOP supporters in the House said they thought that would be a disaster. In fact, it would be a crisis. We would have to respond in Congress by, I think, immediately taking up legislation to reestablish an office we used to have of independent counsel that is beyond the president's power to fire. And I would hope that we would appoint Bob Mueller once again as independent counsel. This has so many echoes of Watergate now, it really is chilling. But, you have to conclude the president here is clearly lashing out at anyone he considers his enemy. He has little confidence in our system of checks and balances, and he must be disregarding all advice of his counsel to keep on talking and tweeting this way. It really is just astounding.
What do you make of the release late Thursday from the Assistant Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, where he said that Americans should exercise caution before accepting as true any stories attributed to anonymous sources? This is a reference to leaks, particularly when they don't identify the country. What was your assessment of that?
You know, I have to say, I read that. It looked like something that was very hastily drafted. In part, it has redundancies in it, and it just is so peculiar. I have no idea what this references, whether there was a story about to break, and this was their way of trying to discourage it, or they're referring to some story that's already out there. Honestly, it leaves us all wondering, what is he talking about? The other question it raises is, we have heard testimony or seen public reports, that the president may have been making an effort, allegedly, to push back on stories he didn't like and trying to enlist people in the intelligence agencies to do so. Is this another effort by the administration now to enlist the deputy AG to push back against news stories that they don't like or disagree with? Honestly, none of us have any idea. It is so irregular. I have to imagine that there's so much turmoil going on in the administration, and it is infecting the Department of Justice.
What are Republicans saying to you privately? If there's an effort to fire the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller, would that change the equation for the Republican leadership in both the Senate and the House, in your opinion?
I think that it would. I think it would have to. There are enough members on both sides of the aisle who are saying both publicly and privately that this would be an absolute crisis and nightmare, that Bob Mueller is very well thought of on both sides of the aisle. There's no basis to fire him, and in fact the regulations provide that he can only be fired for good cause. And clearly there is no good cause here. He is just getting started. This is someone who has served under presidents of both parties. In fact, one of the few, if any, FBI directors since we put a 10-year cap on that term who has gotten a bipartisan extension of that term. So this would be an extraordinarily bad decision, I think, of an even greater degree than the firing of James Comey, and it would have to prompt a bipartisan reaction in Congress.
How important is the probe into the meeting of Jared Kushner, the president's advisor and son-in-law, with a Russian banker who has very close ties to Vladimir Putin?
You know, I can't go into any of the specifics of the investigation, but I can say that Whenever there's an allegation that's a key player within the administration or within the campaign or transition team may be having clandestine meetings with Russians, or is allegedly trying to set up a back channel, or is meeting with a bank president who comes out of essentially the KGB school, and this is either potentially about business interests, which is what evidently this VEB bank said in a public statement, or it's about some other issue. We have to get to the bottom of it. We have to find out. I think it's only prudent. But in terms of the relative seriousness of those allegations against others, that's very difficult to compare. I think all of these issues are very serious.
A colleague of yours, Congressman Brad Sherman of Sherman Oaks, has already asked for an introduction of impeachment articles. You have cautioned against talking about it and using that word. Why?
Well, I have one of the rare experiences of actually prosecuting an impeachment case. I tried a federal judge in the Senate a few years ago. He was a lifetime appointed federal judge who was corrupt, and that was one of only a couple dozen impeachment cases ever tried in the Senate. This is an extraordinary remedy, and when it's applied to the President of the United States, even much more extraordinary. Very wrenching experience for the country. I don't think it's something that you rush into before you have clearly established the evidence. At the end of the day, and I did a lot of research on what constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors, at the end of the day, this is going to be a judgment of Congress whether the president's conduct rises to the level of being disqualifying from office. And in a Republican-led Congress, that only happens if Republican members can go home to their constituents and say this president's action is so violative of law and practice. This is not simply nullifying an election that others didn't agree with. So I do think it's premature to be introducing articles of impeachment. I think we ought to be just focusing on finding the facts, and we can discuss and worry about the consequences later. But we are closer to the beginning of this investigation than we are to the end, and I would much rather see us just focus on getting the facts.
Congressman Adam Schiff, ranking member of House Intelligence, thanks very much for joining us.